In a small town divided by prejudice, an elderly veteran's quiet act of defiance sparks a powerful movement, turning a local diner into a beacon of hope and inclusion. This story is one of resilience, community, and the enduring power of unity, showing that even the smallest stand for justice can transform an entire town. If this story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe to help us bring more inspiring tales to light. Now let's dive into the full story. Isaac Tillman, an 83-year-old black veteran, tightened his grip on his cane as he walked through Riverside's sleepy Main Street toward Sonny's place. The diner was known for its blueberry pancakes, and Mrs. Jenkins from down the hall had sworn they were the best in town. Isaac had always heard it was a friendly spot, though he'd rarely visited. This morning, with the early sun casting a soft glow, seemed like the perfect time for something sweet and a steaming cup of coffee. Isaac pushed the door open, taking in the scent of fresh coffee and fried bacon. Behind the counter, Ray Larson, the white owner, barely glanced up before a frown etched across his face. He set down the coffee pot and crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on Isaac with a piercing stare. "Can I help you?" Ray's tone was dry, his posture unwelcoming. Isaac, feeling the scrutiny but choosing to ignore it, smiled and nodded. "Just looking for a seat and a cup of coffee, son." Ray's lips pressed into a thin line. "Reservations only this morning," he replied with a hint of smugness. Isaac glanced around, taking in the nearly empty booths and tables. The excuse felt flimsy, and a quiet anger simmered within him. He'd faced looks like Ray's before, decades ago when his skin color dictated where he could sit, eat, or drink. Here he was, in a place he'd fought to make better, only to find that old battles were still alive and well. "Understood," Isaac replied, his voice calm but steely. He turned and walked out of the diner, his pride intact. Just as he stepped outside, he heard a low, familiar rumble, the distinct sound of motorcycle engines. A line of bikes rolled up, stopping right outside Sonny's place. Isaac squinted, recognizing a group of men sporting the patches of the Steel Warriors Motorcycle Club, their military emblems glinting in the sunlight. The Steel Warriors were a familiar sight in Riverside. Made up of veterans from all branches, the club wasn't just a group of bikers. They were a brotherhood, bound by loyalty, service, and shared scars from their years in the military. Leading the group was Jack "Bear" Carver, a towering man with broad shoulders and a salt-and-pepper beard. Jack was known for his strong presence and unbreakable sense of justice. And today, as he approached Isaac, he looked like a man on a mission. "Morning, Isaac," Jack greeted, his voice warm but edged with concern as he reached out for a firm handshake. "Everything okay?" Isaac nodded, though he could see the skepticism in Jack's eyes. "Stopped by for a cup of coffee. Turns out Sonny's is reservations only this morning." Jack's expression hardened. He'd known Isaac for years, and he knew him to be a man who never complained unless something was truly wrong. Isaac's calm demeanor didn't fool him. Jack sensed the deeper meaning in his words. Jack turned to his fellow bikers, nodding toward the diner. "Let's go say hi." The Steel Warriors moved as one, their heavy boots thudding against the pavement as they filed into Sonny's place. Inside, Ray looked up, surprise flickering across his face as he saw the line of bikers entering with Isaac at the front. Ray's confidence faltered slightly, but he quickly masked it with his usual sneer. Jack approached the counter, his eyes fixed on Ray. The tension was palpable, and the other patrons sensed it, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Jack's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "I hear you're reservation only this morning, Ray," he said, his tone measured but firm. Ray squared his shoulders, his bravado returning. "I don't need advice on how to run my business." Jack held his gaze, unflinching. "Seems like you're more interested in keeping certain folks out than running a business." Ray's smirk faded, his face turning a shade paler as the rest of the diner watched the exchange. The stillness in the diner felt thick, as though everyone was holding their breath. Ray's fingers clenched around the dish rag he held, his gaze flitting nervously between Jack and the other patrons. Jack stood his ground, unwavering. Ray forced a smirk, but his unease was clear. "It's my diner, and I have the right to refuse service to anyone I choose." Jack crossed his arms, his voice unwavering. "True enough. But you think it's fair to turn away a man who's done more for this country than most?" A man who's more than earned the right to sit at any table in any place he chooses? The other bikers stepped forward, their presence amplifying the weight of Jack's words. Ray glanced around the room, searching for support, but all he found were silent stares and faces filled with quiet judgment. A couple by the window shook their heads, and a young man in a plaid shirt whispered to his friend. One of the patrons, a middle-aged woman at the counter, leaned over to the waitress. "Tell Ray I'll take my breakfast to go," she said, loud enough for others to hear. Jack looked around, meeting the eyes of each person, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "Isaac here wanted a simple cup of coffee, but if you think you're above serving people who've bled for this country, maybe you don't deserve to be running a diner in Riverside." The silence grew thicker. Ray, visibly flustered, muttered something under his breath and stormed into the kitchen, leaving the diner to simmer in the tension he'd created. Isaac looked at Jack, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Didn't expect to start the day like this," he said softly, a mix of gratitude and exhaustion in his voice. Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "We're with you, Isaac. This isn't over." With Ray out of sight, the murmur of voices filled the diner. People shifted in their seats, some casting glances toward the kitchen door as if expecting Ray to return. Others looked at Isaac and the Steel Warriors, their expressions filled with a mix of shame and sympathy. A middle-aged man in a plaid shirt stood up, clearing his throat. "Is this what we're okay with?" he asked, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Turning away a man just because he looks different? Because if that's the case, then I'm not sure this is a place I want to support." Around him, heads nodded. A ripple of agreement spread through the room. A young mother gathered her toddler, exchanging a look with her friend, who nodded back. One by one, patrons began to leave, each taking their stand silently, yet powerfully. The Steel Warriors watched, a silent wall of strength around Isaac. Jack gave Isaac a nod, and Isaac returned it, his face a blend of gratitude and disbelief. "Look, folks," Jack said, addressing the room. "Isaac came in here to have a coffee, like anyone else. The man's given a lot to this town and to this country. We can all do better than letting a place like this turn people away just because of the color of their skin." Just as the last words left his mouth, the kitchen door swung open, and Ray stepped back into the dining area, his face a mask of simmering frustration. His gaze swept across the room, his smirk faltering as he realized the crowd had turned on him. Jack held Ray's gaze, unflinching. "Riverside deserves better than this, Ray. Maybe it's time you think about what kind of place Sunny's really is." Ray's eyes darted between the bikers, the patrons now filtering out, and Isaac. His confidence cracked, but his stubborn pride held him in place, unwilling to concede. He forced a sneer, masking his growing uncertainty. The stage was set, and the Steel Warriors, along with the community, had laid the foundation for a battle he couldn't easily ignore. Ray's face was a cocktail of emotions as he looked from Jack to Isaac and then to the nearly empty diner. With so many customers gathering their things and leaving, he could no longer deny the financial impact of his attitude. But his pride, well, that was another matter entirely. Jack took a step closer, his steady gaze never leaving Ray's. "You know, Ray, if serving everyone fairly is too much for you, maybe you ought to think about selling this place. Let someone run it who respects all people." Ray's nostrils flared, and he forced a laugh that sounded hollow in the quiet. "Sell my diner? To a bunch of bikers?" His tone dripped with disdain. "You think you can just waltz in here, make demands, and I'll hand over what I built with my own two hands?" Jack didn't flinch. He simply nodded, his expression calm. "I do, because a man's only got something worthwhile if he treats people right. And if you can't do that, you've got no business running a place in this town." A tense silence filled the air as the two men locked eyes. Around them, the few remaining patrons murmured in agreement, their loyalty quietly shifting away from Ray's diner to the cause of justice. Jack's steady, unyielding presence made it clear. He wasn't here to negotiate fairness. He was here to demand it. Ray tried to brush off the confrontation with a wave of his hand, but Jack's words had clearly shaken him. "You know what?" Ray sneered. "Do your worst. I'm not selling. This is my diner, my rules, and I'll run it how I see fit." Jack held his gaze for a moment longer before giving a small nod. Then I guess we'll see how long that lasts." With that, Jack turned to Isaac and the other warriors, motioning toward the door. Outside, Jack gathered the group around him. "We're not done," he said, his voice low but determined, "not by a long shot." The steel warriors huddled with Isaac outside Sonny's place. As the morning sunlight glinted off their leather jackets, each man felt the resolve settling in. This wasn't just about a cup of coffee anymore. It was about showing Riverside what they stood for. Jack placed a hand on Isaac's shoulder. "We've got your back, Isaac. No one should go through this alone." Isaac looked down, memories of past battles for equality flickering through his mind. He'd fought for justice before, marched with people demanding fair treatment. Now, even in his twilight years, he could feel the familiar pull, the sense of purpose awakening once more. "I may be an old man," Isaac began, a glint in his eye, "but I'm not too old to stand up for what's right. We didn't come this far to let folks like Ray push us back." Jack nodded. "We're with you. We'll make sure people know the kind of business Ray's running. Let's see if he's still so sure when he's got no customers." The steel warriors agreed, each of them splitting up to spread the word. They stopped by local shops, chatted with neighbors, and spoke to friends. Everywhere they went, they shared Isaac's story, making it clear that Riverside had a choice to make. Would it stand for fairness, or for the outdated attitudes Ray embodied? As Isaac watched them go, he felt a mixture of pride and gratitude. Here were men willing to fight, not with fists, but with the power of unity and truth. And as he walked home, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a hope that maybe, just maybe, real change was within reach. By the next morning, the steel warriors regrouped at a local park to strategize. Jack, standing at the head of a picnic table, laid out the plan. "We're going to make sure everyone in Riverside knows what happened to Isaac," he said, looking each of his fellow warriors in the eye. "We'll need posters, flyers, and support from the locals. And I don't want this to turn into some shouting match. This isn't about tearing Ray down. It's about building up the kind of town we want." Isaac joined them, and his presence brought a hush to the group. He shared stories from his days in the civil rights movement, recounting the power of peaceful resistance. "You don't need fists to win a fight like this," he told them, his voice steady. "What you need is a united front. They can't ignore us if we're all saying the same thing." The warriors listened intently, the respect they felt for Isaac evident in their attentive faces. Inspired, they got to work. By mid-afternoon, the town was peppered with signs that read, "Stand for Justice," "Boycott Sonny's Place," and "Riverside Stands Together." Word spread quickly, and soon, families, shop owners, and students began talking about the incident, many expressing outrage at Ray's behavior. The plan was simple. Make it clear to Ray that until he changed, he wouldn't see another dime from the people of Riverside. And as the warriors handed out flyers, they felt the town's pulse shift, uniting around their cause. As the boycott began, Riverside rallied around Isaac. From shop owners to high schoolers, nearly every corner of the community expressed their outrage. People who'd known Isaac for decades came forward, pledging to support the cause. Posters adorned shop windows, and churches held prayer circles, inviting people to reflect on unity and empathy. Local businesses offered discounts to those who were boycotting Sonny's Place, and community centers hosted events to raise awareness. Isaac's story spread far beyond what he'd ever imagined, and soon the movement took on a life of its own. The Steel Warriors were humbled by the outpouring of support. Every day, people stopped them on the street to share their stories, thank them for standing up, or offer help. Riverside was transforming. Each action, another brick in the wall of a town coming together for justice. Isaac, though initially shy about the spotlight, began to embrace it, seeing the impact his story had on the younger generation. He visited schools, sharing his journey and encouraging students to stand up for what they believed in. In their eyes, he saw hope, a hope that the world could be different if they fought for it together. Meanwhile, Ray's frustration grew. He dismissed the boycott as a temporary fuss and continued telling anyone who would listen that his rights were being trampled. But the empty tables told a different story, and each passing day ate at his profits. Ignoring the warning signs, Ray stubbornly kept his doors open, though hardly anyone came. Bills piled up, and even some of his suppliers began to question their relationship with him. His confidence started to waver, but his pride kept him from acknowledging the truth. Riverside was no longer willing to support him. Determined to wait it out, he doubled down on his position, refusing to change or show remorse. But with each empty day, he began to realize the power of community solidarity, though he still refused to admit he was wrong. Alone in his diner, he wondered if he had miscalculated, but brushed it off as weakness. Yet, in the quiet moments, doubt gnawed at him. The story of Isaac's experience continued to gain momentum, prompting other veterans and residents to come forward with similar accounts. Many shared stories of subtle discrimination they'd faced, whether at Sonny's place or elsewhere, and for the first time they felt the courage to speak up. A local newspaper picked up the story, and Isaac's picture appeared on the front page, captioned, "Riverside's Stand for Equality." The article detailed his experience at Sonny's, the community's response, and the ongoing boycott, drawing attention far beyond Riverside. News outlets from neighboring towns began covering the story, each one amplifying the call for change. Isaac, normally a private man, found himself at the center of a movement. And while he hadn't sought the spotlight, he welcomed the opportunity to make a difference. He began attending community meetings, sharing his wisdom, and encouraging others to reflect on the kind of town they wanted to build. Riverside had become a beacon, a town standing up not only for Isaac, but for every person who had ever been treated unjustly. As more people joined the movement, the unity in the community became undeniable, and Ray's defiance grew increasingly isolated. The foundation of change had been laid, and now Riverside was ready to see it through. Ray arrived at Sonny's place early one morning, hoping to find a few loyal customers waiting at the door. But as he turned the key in the lock and stepped inside, the silence was deafening. Gone were the sounds of morning chatter, coffee mugs clinking, and the shuffle of newspapers. Instead, the booth sat empty, the tables undisturbed, and the coffee in the pot from yesterday had gone cold. As Ray looked around, a pang of regret began to creep into his chest. He tried to brush it off, telling himself that this boycott nonsense couldn't possibly last. But as the hours ticked by, no customers walked through the door. His staff, who'd once greeted him cheerfully each morning, cast sidelong glances, and a few whispered among themselves, their concern evident. Ray's stomach twisted as he went through the day's receipts, barely enough to cover basic supplies, let alone his mounting bills. He'd underestimated the determination of the people of Riverside, and it was starting to cost him. Meanwhile, outside the diner, the streets were bustling. People gathered at nearby cafes, diners, and shops, supporting businesses that aligned with the community's call for respect and inclusivity. Flyers continued to be distributed, and social media posts highlighted the boycott, gaining traction beyond Riverside. Ray couldn't escape the fact that his reputation was slipping away, his name becoming synonymous with prejudice. And though he refused to show it, the cracks were beginning to form. Each empty day chipped away at the confidence he'd once held so tightly, and for the first time he began to consider the possibility of letting go of Sonny's place. The Steel Warriors, sensing that the boycott was building momentum, decided to hold a rally in front of Sonny's place. They spread the word, inviting veterans, activists, families, and anyone who believed in the cause of unity. Jack wanted this to be more than a protest. He wanted it to be a celebration of the town's diversity, a reminder that Riverside stood for all people. The event was held on a warm Saturday afternoon. Banners were strung up around the town square, reading, "Riverside for respect and justice, unity, equality." People from all walks of life filled the square, bringing picnic blankets and chairs, and even setting up tables with food and drinks to share. Kids painted signs, families took photos, and veterans shook hands, some reuniting after years apart. Isaac was the heart of the gathering, seated at a table draped with a banner that read, "Our community, our values." Veterans of all ages came up to him, shaking his hand, sharing stories, and thanking him for standing up. For Isaac, who had once felt sidelined by time and age, the moment was surreal and humbling. Jack took the microphone, his voice carrying through the square as he addressed the crowd. "Today isn't just about one man's experience. It's about the kind of town we want to be. It's about making sure Riverside is a place that welcomes all, no matter who you are. The crowd erupted in applause, and Isaac, sitting in the front row, felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. In that moment, the rally wasn't just a show of unity. It was a promise, a commitment from the people of Riverside to build a town where everyone belonged. Ray watched the rally from the window of Sonny's place, his face a mixture of disbelief and bitterness. He hadn't imagined the town's support for the boycott would last this long, and the sight of people celebrating outside his diner felt like salt in a wound. Frustration mounted, but behind it lay a gnawing fear. A fear that he might lose everything. With business dwindling and his finances in shambles, Ray reached out to Jack, inviting him for a meeting. Jack arrived with an attorney, his calm demeanor only intensifying Ray's unease. They sat across from each other in a quiet corner of Sonny's, Ray's diner, devoid of the lively crowds that had once filled it. Ray tried to regain control of the conversation, but Jack's steady gaze unsettled him. "The town wants a place where everyone feels welcome, Ray," Jack began, his voice steady. "You can choose to fight that, or you can be part of it by stepping down and letting someone else take the reins." Ray bristled, but knew he had little room to argue. "And you think a biker gang can run this place better than I can?" His words were laced with resentment, yet they held a hint of desperation. Jack didn't flinch. "We're not just bikers, Ray. We're veterans, community members, and people who care about this town. We're willing to buy the place from you and turn it into something that represents the values of Riverside." Ray looked at the paperwork Jack's attorney had prepared, his fingers drumming anxiously on the table. He wanted to resist, but he knew the town had already turned its back on him. Reluctantly, he signed the agreement, marking the end of his era at Sonny's place. News of the sale spread through Riverside like wildfire. The Steel Warriors had bought Sonny's place, signaling a victory for justice, inclusion, and the values the town held dear. For the people of Riverside, it was more than a business transaction. It was a triumph over prejudice and a testament to the power of community. Jack and his fellow warriors wasted no time in planning the transformation. They wanted Sonny's place to reflect the values that had united the town. Volunteers from all corners of Riverside came forward to help with the renovations, and the warriors set to work with enthusiasm and dedication. Together, they scrubbed floors, painted walls, and replaced furniture, breathing new life into the once divisive diner. Each detail was intentional. They hung photos of veterans from all backgrounds, decorated walls with messages of unity, and even added a mural that showcased Riverside's history and diversity. The name, too, was reimagined. Sonny's Place was reborn as the Riverside Welcome, a name that conveyed a warm embrace for all who entered. Isaac was involved in every step, sharing stories and ideas, helping ensure that the new space would honor the community's journey and sacrifices. Watching the transformation, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that the place that had once turned him away would now be a symbol of respect and belonging. The grand reopening of the Riverside Welcome was set for a Saturday morning, and anticipation buzzed through the town. People gathered outside, eager to see the transformation. As the Steel Warriors finished the final touches inside, flowers lined the entrance, and a new sign gleamed above the door, its letters carefully painted to symbolize the fresh start. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming, with cozy booths, photos of Riverside's veterans on the walls, and a sprawling mural depicting the town's history of unity and resilience. The mural's centerpiece was a painted depiction of Isaac standing strong, with his military cap and cane, representing the backbone of Riverside's values. As the doors opened, Isaac was the first to walk in. He paused, taking in the space that had once been a symbol of division, but was now a beacon of inclusivity. He made his way to the counter, where Jack handed him a steaming cup of coffee, the same gesture that Ray had refused. "Welcome to the Riverside Welcome, Isaac," Jack said with a smile, nodding to the seat reserved just for him. Around them, the townsfolk began to file in, filling the air with laughter, greetings, and the sounds of clinking mugs. Veterans from all backgrounds, families, and Riverside residents mingled together, each of them a testament to the town's transformation. Isaac sat with his coffee, looking around at the thriving space, and felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For years, he'd feared that the progress he'd fought for might be slipping away. But now, with this diner transformed into a place of unity and respect, he felt a renewed hope. A hope that Riverside would continue to honor those values for generations to come. The morning of the Riverside Welcome's grand reopening dawned bright and clear. Outside, townsfolk gathered in anticipation, the crowd buzzing with excitement. Many wore ribbons on their jackets in solidarity, a symbol of the community's stand against prejudice and their commitment to a more inclusive Riverside. Children held balloons, elderly veterans sported their military caps, and families filled the square, each person eagerly waiting to step inside the transformed diner. Isaac stood at the front of the crowd, flanked by Jack and the Steel Warriors. He wore his own military cap, his face radiating pride. For him, this moment was surreal, a powerful victory in a battle he hadn't expected to fight in his golden years. Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ready to cut the ribbon, Isaac?" he asked. Isaac nodded, his eyes misting slightly as he accepted the scissors. With a swift snip, he cut the bright ribbon stretched across the entrance, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Cameras flashed, and a local news crew filmed as Isaac was the first to step inside the new Riverside Welcome. Photographs of veterans, families, and Riverside landscapes adorned the walls, each a reminder of the town's shared roots and resilience. As people took their seats, veterans from all backgrounds embraced, exchanging stories and laughter, while townsfolk celebrated the diner's transformation. Jack served Isaac a fresh cup of coffee, just as he'd promised, and together they watched as the community filled the space with life and warmth. For Isaac, the new Riverside Welcome was more than a diner. It was a legacy. He saw it as a place where all people would be welcome, where no one would feel the sting of exclusion, and where Riverside's true spirit could thrive. After the grand reopening, the Riverside Welcome quickly became a central gathering spot in town. Every Saturday night, the diner hosted veterans' voices, a tradition started by the Steel Warriors. These evenings transformed the diner into a space where veterans, young and old, shared their stories. For many, it was the first time they'd spoken openly about their experiences, and the community listened with rapt attention and respect. On the first Veterans Voices night, Isaac was invited to speak. The room fell silent as he took the microphone, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. He began by sharing memories from his time in the military, the pride he felt serving his country, and the challenges he faced upon his return. His voice softened as he spoke about the struggles he'd encountered in Riverside, moments of exclusion, disappointment, and the hurt of feeling unwelcome in his own town. "But tonight," he said, his voice firm, "I see a Riverside that's grown. A Riverside that stands together, and I'm proud to be here with all of you." The crowd erupted in applause, some wiping tears from their eyes. Over the next few weeks, more veterans came forward, each sharing stories that deepened the town's understanding of their neighbors. Each voice became a thread in the rich tapestry of Riverside, fostering a unity that was now woven into the very fabric of the town. As the tradition grew, people began to bring in photos and memorabilia from their own families' histories, creating a rotating display of stories and memories. The Riverside Welcome became a living history, each corner filled with mementos that told the story of resilience, respect, and unity. From a distance, Ray watched the success of the Riverside Welcome with a mixture of bitterness and regret. The transformation of his former diner was undeniable, and its popularity only grew with each passing week. What had once been a quiet corner of Riverside was now bustling with laughter, conversation, and the steady hum of community life. One evening, after much soul-searching, Ray gathered the courage to step into the diner. The familiar scent of coffee and warm food greeted him, but the atmosphere was different. There was a warmth here, a feeling of welcome that hadn't existed when he'd owned it. Ray hesitated, unsure if he should stay, when Jack spotted him by the door. Jack approached with a nod, offering a handshake that Ray reluctantly accepted. "Good to see you, Ray," Jack said, his tone friendly but firm. "Welcome to the Riverside Welcome." Ray's gaze wandered over the mural, his eyes lingering on the painting of Isaac, the man he'd once dismissed without a second thought. The changes were clear to him now. The Riverside Welcome wasn't just a diner. It was a symbol of respect, a place where people could feel seen and valued. Ray cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. "You did a good job with the place," he managed, his voice gruff. Jack gave a small smile. "It's the town's place now. We just made it reflect what the people wanted all along." As Ray left, he felt a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The diner had grown into something bigger than he could have imagined, and though he couldn't change the past, he resolved to be better. In his own way, Ray would carry forward the lesson Riverside had taught him, a lesson of humility and respect. Word of Riverside's transformation spread beyond the town's borders, inspiring a ripple effect in nearby communities. People heard the story of how a small town had come together to stand for inclusion, respect, and justice. Visitors from neighboring towns came to the Riverside welcome, some simply curious, others eager to learn how they, too, could foster unity in their own communities. Jack received calls from veterans organizations, community leaders, and even journalists wanting to share Riverside's story as an example of grassroots change. The Riverside Welcome became more than a local diner. It became a place of pilgrimage for those who believed in the power of unity. Isaac, now regarded as a local hero, found himself invited to speak at events in neighboring towns. Each time he shared Riverside's story, he emphasized the lesson he'd learned, that real change starts small, but with enough courage and determination, it can inspire an entire movement. Veterans Voices Nights became so popular that other towns began hosting their own, modeled after Riverside's example. Riverside's journey inspired similar gatherings as communities began to prioritize inclusivity and celebrate diversity, honoring the different voices that made each town unique. Through it all, the story of Riverside's transformation served as a beacon of hope, a testament to the fact that even the smallest town could make a difference by choosing unity over division. Isaac sat by the window at the Riverside Welcome, gazing out at the familiar streets, filled with a peace he hadn't felt in years. He watched children laughing, running past the diner, and families strolling arm in arm down Main Street. Riverside felt different now. It wasn't just the people, it was the spirit of the place. A spirit of unity that had emerged from their stand for justice. For Isaac, the journey had come full circle. He'd spent years fighting for respect, enduring countless disappointments, and wondering if his efforts would ever amount to anything. But now, as he sipped his coffee in a place that once turned him away, he knew that every hardship, every moment of pain had been worth it. He'd lived to see Riverside become a place of acceptance, where all people were welcome, and his heart swelled with pride. Jack joined him at the table, sliding into the seat across from him. "You did good, Isaac," he said, a smile in his eyes. "This place wouldn't be here without you." Isaac chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm just an old man with a story. You and the warriors, you made it happen." Jack shrugged. "Maybe, but your story gave us something to fight for, and now Riverside has something it can pass on." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as people continued to pour into the diner, each one a testament to the legacy of unity they'd built together. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the mural and the photographs lining the walls, Isaac felt a profound sense of contentment. The Riverside Welcome wasn't just a diner, it was a promise that Riverside would always stand for respect, for unity, and for the courage to stand up for what was right. The story of Riverside would live on, not just as a tale of one town's triumph over prejudice, but as a reminder of the power of community, the strength of solidarity, and the unbreakable spirit of those who believed in justice. Thank you for joining us on this journey of resilience, unity, and the power of community. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to help us bring more meaningful tales to life. Your support makes it possible to continue sharing stories that remind us of the strength we have when we stand together.